Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically, beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you watch Midday with Reverend Don, you can add your comment or question onto whatever platform you're watching on. It will appear here in my chat room. I apologize for being a few minutes late today. There was a small technical problem. Um, but we got that straightened out and we are here. And I hope you're having a lovely day today. Today is Monday. And today I thought I would discuss incense. Incense is something that most of us connected to metaphysics use in one way or another. I thought it would be good to talk about its history and its purposes. And hello to Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you, Michael. Incense is one of the oldest magical tools that people use. The only thing that might be older, in my opinion, is fire itself, if we want to count that. Hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. We know that fire goes back very far into our prehistory, and incense, I think, must go back almost as far. The reason, of course, is that whatever is in the fire will scent the smoke, and people must have noticed that right away. And that's basically what incense is and what incense does. It's scenting smoke. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you. The earliest incense, thus, would probably have been things chosen for their aromatic qualities to either build the fire in the first place or to throw onto the fire to make it more aromatic, more pleasant, more appealing. Hello to Christine in the chat room. Good to see you, Christine. Incense comes in a number of different forms, and I was going to run through all of them. And the first one, obviously, is its natural form. And that is what we were just talking about. When you use the actual leaf or a piece of wood or a flower in its natural state and add it to the fire or place it on a hot coal, that is using a piece of natural incense. The kind most commonly used at present is presumably, I think we can say sage. Sage is available for use as incense in its natural leaf form all over the place. And many other plants can be used this same way. You dry the leaf so that it will burn, you add it to the fire, or you add it to a charcoal. This, I think, must have been the first way that incense was used, and it is still used today. Sometimes it is a leaf. Certain flowers can be used that way. Certain kinds of wood can be used that way. And I always find it interesting to use the natural form because it is so indicative of the plant that you're working with. When you use other forms of incense, you don't really see the original form of the plant, but when you're using the natural form, you do. And I think there's something to be said for that, though for the most part, it is not as useful a form of incense as many of the later versions. The next most common, and I think probably oldest form of incense is powdered. When you make a powdered incense, you're taking that natural form, that leaf, that flower, that piece of wood, and you're pulverizing it into powder. You may do this in a mortar and pestle, you may do it in a grinding machine, but you want to reduce it to a fine powder that you then place over your charcoal or throw into your fire. And this is, I think, obviously the next oldest form of incense because it's the obvious simple adaptation. And when I was young, in metaphysical circles, it was the most common. It was very normal for us to use powdered incense. And some people felt that there was a liturgical reason why powdered incense was better. I don't know that anyone thinks that now, but some people did then. Certainly, it's more dramatic. When you use powdered incense, you get a lot more obvious smoke. It can be very dramatic. If you put enough powdered incense into your incense burner, you might think the Wicked Witch of the West is about to appear inside of it. Um, that was a joke in case it wasn't obvious. But it is, in fact, I remember one Fellowship of Isis convention when Lady Dina had basically done that. She used a lot of incense on the altar, and it was spiraling upward from her incense cauldron to the ceiling and then across the ceiling. It was very visually memorable. Also set off the smoke detectors. That was memorable. When I was young, we didn't really have all of those smoke detectors, so using powdered incense was more common. Today, you have to be careful where you're at if you're going to use powdered incense. We were talking about natural incense. Another form of natural incense is resin. The most common resin incenses are frankincense, myrrh, and copal, and dragon's blood, all of which are resins. And they can be used in their natural resinated form and just put on the fire, put on the coal, and they will burn in that state, or you can turn them into a powdered incense. Resins are very aromatic, and as you'll notice from the names that I mentioned, they're some of the most popular incenses. Powdered incense has a very long history. It has been used in temples and churches since prehistoric times. And if you are looking to put on a show, powdered incense is the way to go, assuming you're not going to set off the smoke detectors. If you're outside, powdered incense is ideal. And I'm put in mind of a ritual I attended many years ago where the central circle had a barbecue grill full of coals, and the active power was to add incense over the coals during the ritual, according to what it is you wish to manifest. It was outdoors. It was very memorable, and a lot of smoke. Today, I think more people are sensitive to incense than was once the case. And I think that's partly because it's less common than it once was. And also because smoke in general is less common than it once was. When I was a child, if you went into a restaurant, you would expect to see a blue haze hanging in the air from everyone smoking. We can't imagine that now. But it did tend to make people a little bit less, um, either less sensitive or less aware of being sensitive to things like incense. The next, I would say, oldest form of incense is solid incense, where you take that powdered incense and you mix it with a binding agent. And there are a number of binding agents you can use. In the video version of our degree lessons, we videoed how to do this. And I'm sure there are others who have done that as well. You want to take your ground incense and you mix it to something like gum arabic or some other binding um, agent, which will turn it into a paste. And then you put it into the form you want it to be, and you let it dry. Incense cones are very popular in this sense. You'll also see things like incense squares, and in fact, rather complex shapes can be made, but usually are not. Usually it's a cone or a square, but it's a very interesting project to take on. The thing that makes these um, different from just using the powdered incense is they will burn longer and in a more controlled fashion. If you want to light a cone of incense, it's going to be burning for a while. Whereas if you just put the powdered incense on a charcoal, it will probably be gone relatively quickly. And I would assume that's part of why solid incense became very popular. I think that today, Solid incense and stick incense are the predominant forms you'll see people use, probably stick incense most of all. But the solid form has a lot to say for itself. It's also worth noting, oh, and hello to Calvin in the chat room. Good to see you, Calvin. That there is more than one definition for solid incense. There are also creams that can be made with incense that can be considered a kind of solid incense that you might use for a cologne. And there are a lot of uses for this type of incense. Now, stick incense, and you'll notice each one of these is a further step to the one before. Stick incense is where you take that solid incense, and instead of making a cone or a square or what have you, you wrap it around usually a broom straw and make a long, thin stick of it. And this also has the advantage of burning for a long time. Now, stick incense is not always thin. There are kinds of stick incense that can be quite broad, for want of a better way to put it, and they create a lot of smoke. And they are very popular, for example, in the temples of Asia. You don't see them nearly as much in the West. But they can be very useful when you want a lot of incense. But usually the stick incense we use is a simple broom straw coated with solid incense, which is then allowed to dry. You light it and it burns on down. And it is worth noting that the agent that is used to make the paste, the agent that is used for that can be any of a number of things. And in some cases, particularly with Indian incense, it is manure. It is animal dung. I've known some people who are upset by that. To me, that's a perfectly natural, traditional thing, and is a long-standing part of that kind of incense making. But if it matters to you, you may want to be certain of what has been used as a combining agent for your incense. So those are the predominant different kinds of incense. You also have self-lighting incense, which is a powdered incense which has an extra ingredient that will make it light on its own without a charcoal or other external fire. And there are a number of different ingredients that can do that. And self-lighting incense can be very helpful, because if you've ever worked with powdered incense, you will know that the incense charcoals that you commonly come across don't always work that well. If it lights on its own, you're a step ahead. But the other thing that can be done with these, and again is very big in Asia, so you can use the self-lighting incense to create a design in a small plate of sand, for example. And a design for luck is very common. And the act of creating the design is a meditation. And hello to Tom in the chat room. It's good to see you, Tom. And then you light the incense, and it burns through the design and brings the manifestation into being. That, I think, is a very interesting use of self-lighting incense. And these are all some of the very different things that we might do with incense. Now, I mentioned earlier that many more people are sensitive to incense now than perhaps at one time. However, I remember this from many, many years. When I was when I was a young man, when I was in Chicago specifically, we had a gentleman, one of the high priesthood, who could not tolerate incense. There was only one incense that he was not sensitive to, and that was kaifi, and his particular brand of kaifi. And out of consideration, he would always carry this with him if he came to someone's ritual and explained the situation, and they would always be happy to use it. But the question does come up, If you have someone at your ritual, if you have someone in your family who is very sensitive to incense, what do? Do you not use anything for incense? Or do you use something else? And the answer depends in part on whether they're sensitive to the scent or sensitive to the smoke. If they're sensitive to smoke, there are a number of smokeless incenses that can be used, ranging from fresh plants, which will scatter their scent around the room if you wave them about, to aerosol sprays, which will disseminate the scent in a way that is acceptable to use as incense under these circumstances. In fact, I know several people who have made special aerosol versions of sage for cleansing that worked beautifully well and did not involve anything involving smoke. Now, if the people that you're dealing with are sensitive to the smoke, you would probably have to do something symbolic, like perhaps have a feather that you could wave when you want to honor the element of air, or some other symbol of that. But there's always something you can do to accommodate someone who has a special need, and you should always make the effort to do it. And sometimes it can be a very creative thing. One of the things that, oh, and hello to Bright Eyes in the chat room. It's good to see you. And Bright Eyes says, good afternoon from Florida. A year ago, I was in Florida. Now I'm in the Midwestern winter, but I'm surviving it. And currently we're having a bit of a heat wave, so I can't complain. It is currently well, 34 degrees. So definitely a bit of a heat wave. But a couple of days ago, it was up to 40, which was just amazing after where it's been. But these are some of the different things you can do for incense. And in metaphysics, we use incense in a number of ways. But most commonly, at least in the Wiccan background, we use it for cleansing, we use it for blessing, and we use it to honor the element of air. And all kinds of different incenses can be used for cleansing. All kinds of different incenses can be used for blessing. And if you like incense and you're not sensitive to it, you can have a lot of fun with the different scents. I am a great lover of scent. Scented oil, and scented oil can also be used in place of incense if you are in need of something other than literally an incense, and often is. Now, what do you do with your incense? You, as I say, you add it to a fire, you put it over a hot coal, or if it's like a stick or a cone, you put it in an incense holder. If you're using powdered incense, you'll also be using a holder, but it may be a more capacious vehicle than what you would use for an incense stick. There are many incense holders made just for a stick or just for a cone, but if you're going to be using a charcoal, you need something large enough to hold that charcoal. And it's usually a good idea to first put a bed of sand at the bottom of your incense burner and then add your charcoal. And you may also want to use a thurible, which is an incense burner or a censer hanging on the end of a chain or a group of chains. And I remember back in the day, oh, and Christine, hello, Christine, it's good to see you in the chat room, says, I like scented candles too. Yes, you could do that under the circumstances where you need to avoid a smoking incense. And there's such wonderfully scented candles available today that we tend to forget that that sort of thing wasn't available in the same way historically. I've talked in other programs about how colored candles were not available as they are today historically. A few may have existed, but mostly candles were available in their natural color. But getting back to incense holders, when I was a child, there was a book by, I believe, Manly Hall. And hello to Magic TV in the chat room. And this book included instructions for making ritual tools. I believe it came out in the late 1950s. It was still very popular in the 1960s, when a lot of these things were not nearly as readily available outside of metropolitan centers. And it talked about how to make your own thurible from a tuna can. And what you would do is you would take your tuna can, you would take off the label, you would wash it very thoroughly. You would create 4 holes at the quarter points and attach chains to these that you would hold it by. And you could then decorate it any way you wanted, and you would have a thurible. At that time, trying to buy a thurible, though possible, was not that easy, especially if you were not in a major metropolitan area. So this was interesting information, and I've remembered it all this time. I don't know that I remember much else from that book, but I remember the tuna can thurible. And I always loved smoke um, powdered incense using a thurible. I always thought it was so very dramatic, but you also have to be careful with it. And I have to tell you a couple of things I have seen happen with thuribles. Um, the first one, not strictly a thurible, but my grandmother had a beautiful incense burner, very ornate, had the theme of elephants, and the 3 trunks of the 3 elephants that decorated the burner were also the 3 legs. And I remember burning incense in this as a child, and being a child, I was not smart enough to realize, oh no, those legs are going to be hot. And I went ahead and picked it up by the leg, and at least at that age, it seemed very, very hot. You want to remember, your incense burner will get hot. So be very careful about picking it up with your hand. Now, if you have used a bed of sand, you can also use a bed of stones or aquarium pebbles or things like this. You have a little bit more leeway in that regard, but it will still get hot over time. And you want to be careful not to burn yourself. Incense is hot. Another thing that I once saw, someone was using a beautiful thurible, doing a great job. They swung the thurible once too often, and the hot coal flew out of the thurible, kind of whizzed across the room, landed on the carpet, and made a noticeable black stain. So don't be too enthusiastic if you're using a thurible either. I don't think you'll read that in any book except perhaps mine. I think I did mention it. But it's something to bear in mind. It is something that can happen if you get too carried away. So do remember, incense is a hot item, and it can be a little on the dangerous side because of that. One other incense caveat I will give you, I was once involved in a beautiful wedding. My friend Novala was the presiding cleric. I was acting as high priest. And at a certain point, I had done part of my portion, and I stepped back toward the altar, not realizing I had stepped up against the incense burner, which proceeded to burn through my robe and gave me a nice little shock. And you want to remember, these things are hot. But generally, if you handle them carefully and properly, you won't have any problem. So with that, I see we're coming to the end of our half hour. And I want to take a moment and announce my newest Patreon seminar. I have to admit, the last couple of months, I've been a little bit slow on the Patreon seminars, but we're going to have one in February. And we're going to have that seminar on Sunday, February 11th at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be on love, sex, and magic. So if you'd like to take part in that seminar, it is free to members of my Patreon at the seminar tier or above, or available to the general public for $25 a ticket. And I think that will be a fascinating subject, and I hope you'll consider joining me for that. And with that, we've completed our half hour. I should say that I'm a little hoarse today, and the reason is that I am going for lab work after the show, and so I have been fasting all morning, which meant no coffee. But here I am functioning, and anyway, I am a little hoarse if you're wondering, and that would be why. But I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll sound like I normally sound, and we will have another show. So if you will join me for our closing prayer. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in your presence in our lives, and we ask you to always help us to find the best alternatives that are presented to us. Help us to know what we truly want and what is best for us, and to make our decisions based on this. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we love you. And again, we rejoice in your presence and knowing you are always present, but from respect. We thank you for being here, and we know that you are here now and always. And may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always. I thank you for being here. I love spending this time with you, and I'll be back tomorrow.